Hi, welcome to this Nitro Fundamentals discussion on block and paragraph formatters. We're going to talk about block and paragraph formatters together today because there's a symbiotic relationship between the two. First, let's look at a paragraph. A paragraph really needs no explanation. A paragraph simply creates a paragraph in the document. Just as if you were in a word processor and you pressed enter, which created a line in the word processor. That's the same thing that's happening in Nitro when you create a paragraph. If you're in a word processor and you type a bunch of text, maybe a paragraph of text, and then it wraps and it wraps and it wraps, and then at the end you press enter, that created a paragraph. That's exactly the same thing that's happening in Nitro. It's going from the left margin to the right margin, it wraps, and then at the end it breaks onto a new line, and that makes a paragraph. So a paragraph is simple to understand. A block, on the other hand, the reason we're talking about them together is because a block creates paragraphs. So a block will have certain content inside of it, whatever that is. We call them elements. And each one of the element items inside the block, when it renders it into the document, the block will take each one of those element items, turn it into a paragraph, and place it in the document. The block itself never actually enters into the document. It just creates paragraphs from its content. A block is useful because you can group together paragraphs under certain circumstances where you need to control the formatting in a particular area. But that explains why we're talking about blocks and paragraphs together, because a paragraph is a paragraph in the document and a block creates paragraphs. Okay, so let's get to it. First, let's just begin to explore paragraphs. And before I do that, we'll just take a look here. You can see I've got two variables in this document. Otherwise, we're just looking at a normal Scratch document. So first, let's leave that text there, start from scratch. And let's just go right above that and just put paragraph with the semicolon. So if we watch over here in the document, we press F5, there we go. It moved it down. It did exactly the same thing you would do if you were in a word processor and you went to that line and pressed enter. It made a blank line, which is a blank paragraph. Okay, so that is the most fundamental use of a paragraph, is to just create a line on the page. So we're going to go ahead and add a revision to the paragraph. So we're going to revise it. And let's just take this long text here, place it in there, and press F5. And there we go. We have a paragraph of text on the document. So obviously, once we have content being displayed in the document, we want to often format it in various different ways. So we want to look at how to use some of the formatters with a paragraph. And this is going to be true across the board for all Nitro formatters. You can always go to a formatter and press F1 and see the specific properties for that formatter laid out here. So these specific property coupled with some global formatters comprise the properties that you can add to a formatter. And so to the paragraph formatter, the first thing we're going to do here is we're going to look at some simple things. Let's just start with first indent, and let's just set it to 0.5 inches. Okay, we'll watch the text over here, press F5, and we have our indentation. So that's how you start to manipulate the text, by adding a property to the revision of a formatter, in this case a paragraph. So if we change that to left indent and we press F5, that indents the entire paragraph. And then if we wanted to have something, simple like a hanging indent, which if you've ever done APA formatting, then you've dealt with this before, where the first indent needs to be less than everything else, so we can do something like that where we can drop that first line back. But this is an example of how you can use formatters in Nitro. You just place the property name here, give it its value, and then it renders the content. So let's leave the first indent in here. Okay, so that talked about placing properties in a revision for a paragraph and how to arrange the formatting of the text. So now I want to talk a little bit about starting the paragraph using some of its parameters. So when we actually construct the paragraph here, we use the parameters that it will take to change its appearance. So we can see that this one takes two different parameters, a border and a tab stop class. So to start with here, I'm not going to do borders right away. We're just going to talk about tab stop class. And we can see that it takes tab stop class array and it takes tab stops. Sounds complicated, but it's really not. In Nitrile, if something takes an array of a certain type, you can normally shortcut having to type it out, and in this case just put an array. So we're just going to put something in here like 0.25 inches and 3 inches and 6. Let's make it 6.5 inches. And so let's add some content, and let's add left, center, and right. And then if we just press F5 right now, nothing will, they won't be positioned. As we can see, they showed up here in a new paragraph because we don't have any tabs. So if we want to use tab stops, we have to have tabs. So we'll just put tabs in there. And I need to reduce the size of one of these. There we go. So we've got one on the left, one in the center, and one on the right. There's our 3 tab stops. But we can take this one step further. Since tab stops aren't really encountered many other places other than paragraphs, it's a good idea to explain them here. So I'm going to take this to the next level here on the tab stop discussion, and we're going to jump up here, and I'm going to shortcut things by pasting in the code. And we're going to create a variable called tab list. And in the tab list, we are going to create 3 tab stops. We're going to change these values. Well, you know what? These actually look pretty good. We're going to go with 1/4 of an inch here, back 1/4 of an inch here, and 1/2 inch here. And we'll make this one tab type left, this one tab type center, and this one tab type right. So this is left aligned at the tab, center the text on the tab, right aligned on the tab. And then we're going to throw in some leader dots here that are going to lead the content up to this tab. And let's press F5 on, well, I got to put the tab list in. So place the tab list in here. All right, that's pretty straightforward. All we're doing is passing in a tab list, a list of tab stops into here, an array of tab stops. I press F5, and we can see how it reconfigured itself here. So let's just change this content, and let's say that this is maybe the title of a document, and this maybe is the word page. And then this here, we can access a thing called doc fields dot page number, and that'll automatically place our page number in there. So I'm going to hit save and F5, and that looks nice. So now let's just arrange our paragraphs. So I'm going to Control X on that and put it up here to the top. Save it, F5. Hey, not bad. This would be useful for, say, something like a header, where you need to have the page number, or maybe even a footer. But that illustrates for us how to use tab stops with a paragraph. Okay, so let's just continue building out our document here with some more paragraphs. So here's a paragraph that we are going to use a special feature of Nitrile that places our lorem ipsum text in here. So lorem ipsum, I'm going to give it 60 words. and press F5. All right, so that created over here a lorem ipsum paragraph. And it's hugging right against the one before it, which is what a paragraph is going to do. So very first property we're going to put in here is space before, and we're just going to give it 10 points. You can give it anything you want. You can use pixels or inches or whatever. I'm just going to use points. So there we go. That pushes it down, makes it a little more readable. And we're going to make a call out of this just to get some experience with formatting content. So we want to left indent and right indent this paragraph. So left indent, we're going to give it 20 points. And we're going to go right indent, and we're going to give it 20 points. And let's start by seeing how that works. Okay, very nice. And the next thing we're going to do is we're going to justify this text full. So we're going to say par alignment, and we're going to use justify. Okay, there we go. And then to make this a nice call out here, we're going to go ahead and add borders. So the first parameter in a paragraph is border class. And we're going to use a little shortcut here. Border TB for border top bottom. And we're going to give it, we're going to give it 1 pixel. Don't know what I did there. There we go. Okay, so that's going to give us a top bottom border on our paragraph. So paragraphs can have borders, as you can see here. That gives us a top bottom border with justified text. And last but not least, let's go ahead and throw in a property here for the background color. So we're going to use par background, and we're going to give that a color. Actually, I'm going to give that a web color here, since none of the default colors are light enough. I want this to be super light. So we're going to do F6. That'll be a super light gray. There we go. So we quickly formatted ourselves a nice call out in our document. So let's go ahead and add yet another paragraph here. Maybe. So we're going to say Dorothy was famous for saying, and then here's her quote here. It's short text. So let's add that in here. And right now, if we just run that, it's going to drop in right here. And we're going to need a space before on this one too. We're going to talk about that in a moment, but for now, we're going to put it right in there. That's going to drop it down. And we want to go ahead and put quotes around this quote here. So we could do that multiple different ways. We could put them inside the string. There's multiple ways to do this, but Nitrile in format class up here where it says using formats has a few character shortcuts, and it just so happens that quote is one of them. We're going to say quote, short text, quote, dot. Those are some built-in shortcuts we have. So we're going to press F5. And there we have Dorothy was famous for saying, "There's no place like home." And actually we want to put that dot. Why not put it right over here? Excellent. Okay, so now to keep these things spaced, and we actually need this one to be spaced also up here, so it's not sitting right under this top line. So we would need to do another space before up here under this paragraph. So now we drop into why a block is useful. So I'm going to take these 4 paragraphs that we created already, and I'm going to put them in a block. And I'm going to take this space before out of here. I'm going to put it up here in the block. and take it out of this one too. So if you remember what a block does, a block goes down and for each one of its elements, it creates a paragraph, which these are already paragraphs. So it won't need to create these, but it will add this property to each one of these paragraphs. So each one of these is going to get a space before of 10 points. So let's start with that. F5, watch the content. There we go. Very nice. It spaced everything out. That looks great, except that it put a line up here at the top. So rather than do that, let's use a property called a separator. And we're going to tell it, separate these with a paragraph and set the line height of that paragraph to 10 points. Now we press F5, and now what that is saying is separate all of your elements with this. So this creates a 10-point paragraph between each item, and it doesn't push down the first line. And then lastly, to kind of clean up the differences in the text here, we're going to take this par alignment justify out of the callout, and let's put it at the block level here. And that justifies everything inside the block. So right about now, if you watched our fundamentals video on formatters, you're saying to yourself, wait a minute, a document formats its stuff in a block-like manner. So why do you have a block here? And you're absolutely right. Because a block, I put the block here specifically for illustration purposes, but it's important to note that when things have block-like behavior, then they will behave exactly like a block. So let's view that here. Let's take this block out, and we're going to put another one in, so do not fret. Let's take this one out, and let's see how the document behaves. It should essentially do exactly the same thing that a block did. It should take these and apply them to each one of these paragraphs. So essentially we should see no change in the content over here when I press F5, which I'm going to do right now. Perfect. So now to illustrate once again how a block in fact is useful, let's create one that actually does something. I'm just going to place some formatters in here, and then we'll talk about which ones they are and what they do. So I'm adding in here a separator like we did above, text family. Obviously I'm setting a font family. I'm setting the italics to true, and I'm setting the paragraph alignment to left. Now I'm just going to put some raw text in here. I'm going to use the lorem ipsum again, size 60. And let's just look at that real quick. Lorem ipsum is just a string, and we're going to put 2 of those. So a block's job is to create paragraphs using these formatters in the document. So I added that. Let's see what happens. All right. So now we have the document laying its content out like this, and then it hits this block, and these paragraphs are laid out with a different font, with italics on, and different paragraph alignment. These are justified, and these are not justified. So that explains how a block can be used to set apart or set aside or group a certain number of paragraphs for different reasons. Now, something I want to discuss here, because you're probably wondering, why are we using separator over again when it's already stated up here? I think the easiest way to explain this is that inheritance is applied for certain formatters and not for others. For sure, text formatters, inheritance works and it traverses down until it's changed. That's not true for all formatters, and there's various reasons for that. The best way to find out is to simply test to see if you need it. So in this case here, let's just take out this separator, press F5, and we can see that the separator did not pass through. So let's put it back in, and then let's take out par alignment. Now, this one is set to justify. So if justify passes through to this block, then we'll see these paragraphs justify. F5, and they did justify. So par alignment passed through. So that's an example of how certain properties are passed down through inheritance, others aren't. And sometimes you need to place a block, put specific content inside that block, and control the formatting within the scope of that block. So that concludes our discussion on blocks and paragraphs. So I hope this information helps you on your Nitro programming journey. Thanks for watching.